Hello and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp May. She's the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is May 1st, 2024. I'm Harley Schlanger and I will be your host. You can send in your questions and comments to us via email at questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can post them on the YouTube page. Now, Helga, we're witnessing a growing rebellion on college campuses across the United States as students are expressing their opposition to the policies of the Biden administration and the Congress for funding the Israeli attack on Gaza, which has killed more than 34,000 people. There's a CNN poll that was out the other day which showed that over 80% of young people between 18 and 34 oppose Biden's policy on support for Netanyahu. Yet in the Congress and from leading figures, including Biden himself, there are calls for silencing the opposition that's being expressed in these campus demonstrations. So our first question that came in is, what are your thoughts on what's happening on the campuses? And can this make a difference?
Well, I think what we are experiencing is that the younger generation, students, but also others, obviously are not bought by a corrupt establishment, and they have kept their absolute sense of what is right and what is wrong. And I think it will be extremely important that there are some people in the so-called establishment who have the courage to do likewise and support the students, as some have done, but more is needed, because we are in a strategic situation where clearly the efforts to maintain the power structure of the unipolar world by promoting the Ukraine war, by promoting the war in the Middle East, by trying to extend global NATO. I mean, all of these are efforts to maintain and actually expand the existing order, which will not succeed. There is no way in this universe how the effort to go back to a status quo where the United States is the world policeman and the European allies are just servile slaves, and that the world can be run on the basis of an assumed and imagined moral superiority of the West. I think this is completely out. And now the big question is, sure, the efforts to suppress the students by police, by threatening to suspend them from the education, by expelling them from even their dorms so that they cannot return to their sleeping quarters. This is done on pressure by the hedge funds and the corporations who are threatening to cut off funding to the universities, and naturally some elements in the Congress. That will not succeed. What that will do is it will increase the polarization. It will make it all the more difficult to find a diplomatic solution, to find a way of resolving this in a peaceful way. And, I think it just furthers the danger of an absolute polarization. Because if you look at, in the time of social media, and, you cannot control the media as you could it a couple of years ago. So the students or the young people and all the people in the global south, they're watching what is going on in the United States, and they're watching what the German position is, and then they draw their own conclusion and basically come to the conclusion that the governments of the so-called global West are hopelessly lost. They have lost their morality. And, for example, if you look at some pictures where the German ambassador in West Jordanland and also in Pakistan, another German ambassador, they were heckled and booed out by students who absolutely denounced Germany for its support of the US-Israeli policy. So I think, I can only hope that there would be reasonable Americans, like the different members of the VIPs. There are many groups fighting for a peaceful resolution, like Pax Christi and many other groups supporting a different solution. I would really hope that that impacts the public debate in the United States and elsewhere in such a way that more people basically put pressure on Israel to stop this, because it's not stopping. Biden is Blinken, who is running around in the region right now, is pretending to insist that this is now the chance for Hamas to agree to a compromise, while Netanyahu is meeting with his cabinet members who are telling them no way. And then Netanyahu says that the offensive in Rafah will occur no matter what a possible deal with Hamas will be. So the whole thing looks like the horror show is continuing. And, since you mentioned 34,000 people dead, they just found that probably another 10,000 at least are buried under the rubble of the different destroyed houses in Gaza. So I think, it is an unbelievable situation. And I think the more people stand up and give support to the students, the better it is. And I can only call on people to do exactly that.
Well, we have some questions that actually demonstrate exactly what you're saying about the polarization and the response internationally. Let me start with one that I received from a contact in Cameroon, who said, "We've seen videos of the New York Police Department riot police storming Hamilton Hall at Columbia University, breaking windows to get in and arresting more than 100. My colleagues and I would like to ask President Biden and all those calling for silencing the students, where's this democracy you're always yelling about?"
I think it shows its true face. I mean, democracy, while it may be a nice concept, and it was for sure so in ancient Greece, even so there the sophists started to give it a bad name already then. But in reality, the democracy has vanished step by step for a long time, and we are really not in a rules-based order, but we are in governments in the so-called collective West who bend the rules as they find them necessary. That's what I'm trying to say. That I think that there should be adult people, and they can be very young. You can be adult at a very young age, but there should be people who recognize that by having such a hard line to use the riot police against demonstrating students who have been not violent, that's a fact. What you do with that is you are ruining the reputation of democracy, the reputation of that there is such a thing as rule of law and human rights. And I think this is a potentially irreparable damage, which can only lead to a bloodbath or a revolution. It does not lead to a peaceful negotiation. And I think, more than ever before, diplomacy, nonviolence, and a dialogue to find a reasonable solution is the demand of the hour, because the other dimension of this whole thing is that the hysteria for war is increasing around the globe, especially if you look at the different deployments around NATO, that it's really absolutely time to step back and think hard, because if you escalate, you end up in World War III. And I think that is a dimension of the conflict, so that if democracy gets discredited in the eyes of the whole world, which it does right now, it has strategic implications.
Now, on the question of what's happening on the campuses, There was a report on Fox News that last night there was a counter protest at UCLA in Los Angeles. And one of the students told Fox News that the counter protesters were not students, but wanted to create a pretext to attract the police. Now we have a question from Arnold in Michigan who asks, what operations have been put in place to make the demonstrations turn ugly and even violent?
Well, while I don't have the details concerning what happened in LA, I mean, if you look in the history of conflicts, not only in the United States, but internationally, false flag operations, provocations, counter gangs, gang counter gang, that has been the repertoire of, empires who are trying to keep control. So I think that this requires an urgent vigilance by everybody and an absolute demand not to deviate from the nonviolence. I mean, there is in Germany a video circulating now where the journalists from the second channel TV were caught how they implanted in a peaceful demonstration of the farmers a couple of weeks ago who were demonstrating against the measures of the government and the EU. And they were quite peacefully, and they were going, on with their demonstration. And all of a sudden, a guy comes from the sidelines with a poster which says "More weapons to Ukraine" and some, maybe Taurus or whatever. And all of a sudden, the TV crews, turned their cameras, filming this guy from such an angle that it looked as if he would be part of the farmers' demonstration. Then some farmers nearby recognized the swindle, and they started to point out that this guy did not belong to them. And then you could see on the video how the TV crew was carefully guiding this guy, behind some line where he was protected from the anger expressed at him. Now, this is in flagranti an effort how you try to put provocateurs into a peaceful demonstration. And I think that these tactics are documented well, and I think it probably would be a useful task for people to put together a history about such provocations internationally, where all of a sudden peaceful demonstrations were turning violent because there was some agent provocateur or some other provocation. And I think it would be quite useful to circulate these historical examples, which there are tons of them, in order to inoculate people and not fall for such provocations.
Okay, we're talking with Helga Zepp May, and you can still get your questions in. Send them to questions@schillerinstitute.org. Now, Helga, there was an incident yesterday or 2 days ago on Monday night. The finance minister of Israel, Smotrich, called for the total annihilation of cities in Gaza, including Rafah, citing the biblical passage about Amalek, about the wiping out of the people of Amalek, that the attack did not leave a man or woman alive. Now, there's a question that came in from Texas. The person writes, this statement violates the provisional measures issued by the International Court for Justice. Will they act before more people die? Let me just add that Haaretz had an editorial today calling for Smotrich to be removed from the cabinet for his repeated calls for genocide.
Yes, I think that is very clear. And if the International Court of Justice, I don't know what the procedures are, if they can respond on the spot on their own, or if they need some government like the South African government or the Nicaraguan government to demand action. But I think, this is so absolutely 100% obvious that there is no margin for doubt. This reference to Amalek is that is the proof, and that has been documented before. So I think that the international community should really make this an issue, because it's very clear that Netanyahu is, trying to, prolong the war, because if there are new elections, he would be out and then he may face legal trouble. So I think it's definitely a situation which does require an urgent intervention from the outside. And Netanyahu said that, no matter what these so-called negotiations with Hamas right now are, I think they're taking place in Egypt, in Cairo right now, that no matter what, he will make the attack on Rafah. So, and all the plans, the ridiculous behavior that some governments are throwing food and other humanitarian aid from airplanes down, which in many cases even kills people because they get hit by accident or they are so desperate to get to the little food. And at the same time, there are more weapon deliveries to Israel to continue the killing. This definitely has to stop. And I think that the demand, internationally, it's very clear that it can only come from the outside. And there has been a tremendous failure because, the United States is backing Israel. That's very clear.
Now, you had mentioned before the ongoing NATO military exercises and the war provocations coming from the West. We have a question from Ireland, who the person writes, there seems to be no caution in NATO governments about the language they're using about war with Russia. Though the Russian response has mostly been measured, but aren't those speaking of war worried that moving from talk about being war ready to sending troops could be one provocation too far?
Well, I think obviously not. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so irresponsible talking all of this stuff, when you hear to some of these politicians, I'm absolutely convinced that they have a screw loose in their upper mind, because how can you talk about nuclear war, about, the Hungarian foreign minister, Szijjártó, who was just in Dushanbe, where he made an absolutely clear-cut warning about that all this hysteria about war with Russia, the use of nuclear weapons, it's creating such a frenzy and such a hype that it could lead to that in the very short term. Or look at Stoltenberg. Stoltenberg just said that one should make sure that the weapon supplies to Ukraine is guaranteed, no matter what the domestic policies of the different NATO countries will be, because that can obviously change because of elections and so forth. So he proposes that NATO takes over the coordination of the weapon deliveries to Ukraine, and he talks about 5 years. Have you ever thought that democracy may be still an issue? That's what Baerbock said. She said, I will make sure that weapons be delivered to Ukraine, no matter what my voters think at home. Are we a democracy? Obviously not. I think it is really important that we start to collecting these kinds of statements, because pretty much it will be clear even to the most unthinking person that we are about to lose democracy. So I think that I can only say we need a much stronger peace movement. I think we need a lot more people to engage in, like the efforts what the Schiller Institute and the International Peace Movement, Peace Coalition is doing by, trying to, put solutions on the table which change the geometry. Because if we continue this kind of talk, or just take another thing which just was reported, that in the US War College, there were just between US Stratcom and some other entities, war games which exercised a multi-level, different faceted war involving several nuclear powers. Obviously, Russia, China, possibly Iran, possibly North Korea. But having war games which go through a multi-connected plan of such wars, okay, you can say it's only a war game, but war games are, the preparation for what could become reality very quickly. And, I think this danger of an escalation of warmongers, take, for example, this German politician. She is the chairwoman of the Defense Commission. Her name is Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann. She's the leading candidate of the Liberal Party for the European Parliament upcoming. And now a court in Düsseldorf decided that it is legitimate to call her a warmonger because she is. I mean, would you vote for a warmonger? Obviously, we have to get people really to when you are disconnected from the consequences of your deeds, when you are disconnected from reality, you are clinically insane. And I think that is a discussion which is urgently needed, and the more people participate in it, the better. But even more important is participate in our efforts to change the agenda to an international security and development architecture in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia, because we have to change the general direction. We have to go back to diplomacy and negotiation and leave the idea that war will decide on the battlefield, or the weapons will decide on the battlefield, because that may be the end of it very soon.
Okay, we have a couple more questions here for you, Helga. Munashe, who's a regular participant, asks, why is the U.S. threatening the International Criminal Court over the possible Israeli arrest warrant? What would be the impact of this action? I assume he means if the ICC issued an arrest warrant. So why is the U.S. responding against it?
I think it's, the U.S. did not sign the ICC treaty, so they don't feel that they have anything to do with it. But they, it's again, if you veto all the time in the UN Security Council, if you do not listen to resolutions decided by the UN Security Council, if you say whatever the UN Security Council decides is non-binding, and that was the reaction after the last UN Security Council resolution, in respect to Gaza. I mean, what you are actually saying is you are saying that international law does not exist. The might of the most powerful is the only thing which rules. And I think this idea coming from certain congressional forces to retaliate against the ICC, I should say that, doesn't have a good reputation, because they used to be known as the court which only prosecutes African leaders. And indeed, I think in their record, they have not ever prosecuted anybody who is belonging to the establishments of the West, so to speak. Now, the situation is such that the arrest warrant, they did issue one against Putin. Nobody protested about that. So just the potential that they could do that is obviously too much for some people who have obviously ruled out of their mind the idea that there is an international law which would be superior to national law. And they say, no, we are the police and we are going to retaliate against the judges. Now, I don't know what caused the International Court of Justice, which is not the ICC. These are two different courts. Yesterday, to make a ruling rejecting immediate measures against the German government in the case which was introduced by the Nicaraguan government against Germany for weapon delivery and therefore, aiding the genocide against Gaza. So the International Court of Justice did not make a ruling forbidding Germany to continue to do that. However, they did not throw the case out. So it will now be investigated, and that may take many months or even years. So it will not immediately impact the present catastrophe. I don't know why they did that. Have they been leaned on? I don't know. It's a very good question. There is very clearly the strategy of the German government, whereby they changed their tactic or strategy or whatever you want to call it by, before they were arrogantly refusing any such insinuation. More recently, they shifted their line by saying, we are already reducing our weapon sales, and we're only selling things which are not really weapons, they're only helmets and other things. So they're trying to, sweet talk their own support. But, I don't think this will hold because, the world is the moral part of the world is so upset about what is happening that, it will just lead more and more to the alienation of the global South who are watching all of this. And it's very bad because my hope is still, and I'm not giving up this hope, that we can find a way of getting the countries of the global South and the countries of the so-called collective West to cooperate, because that's the only way. But the more such actions like, threatening to retaliate against the ICC or, trying to somehow influence the situation otherwise, it will just lead to more polarization, and it's detrimental to the idea of a peaceful resolution.
Now, here's a question that delves into political philosophy. The questioner writes, there's a lot of confusion over the word democracy, but technically the United States is a republic which elects its officials through democracy. But it is a republic. There was a lot of discussion among the founding fathers about this. Can you say something about that?
Yes, a democracy, while it is the holy cow of the unipolar, people who are fighting for a unipolar world, it is actually historically not so well regarded. For example, Plato and Thucydides, by the way, both of them concluded that democracy is only the other side of the coin of tyranny, because they say that democracy does not function because you have the rule of the many, which you cannot do. For example, if you rule in a basic democratic way on every topic, you get nowhere, because every lamp you put in the street, every person you appoint, every little detail would have to have a majority vote, and obviously that does not function. So I think that the democracy is really the nice side of what is in reality a tyranny. You can find many examples, and one could look, for example, is the United States still a democracy, or has it become a plutocracy? If it takes so many millions to get a seat in the Congress, if it takes so many two-digit millions to get a Senate seat, if you get, really a lot of money to become president, I don't know if democracy is really the right term to characterize that. And, for very good reasons, the idea that the America was founded as a republic is a superior concept, because it was Nicolaus of Cues, the great German philosopher and thinker of the 15th century, who was the first one who developed the concept of a representative system, whereby the elected representative is in a reciprocal legal relationship whereby he both represents the interest of the state, of the government, towards the elected, towards the electors, towards the people, but at the same time he represents the interest of his constituencies towards the government. So he is in this representative reciprocal position, and that was really what republicanism means, and that was what was established with the American Revolution and American Constitution. So, the problem naturally is if you have representatives who have this reciprocal responsibility, but they are basically following a different code, like that in order to be re-elected, you have to follow the rules of the club or else you will be out. I mean, that's the same thing in Germany, where many parliamentarians have told me over the years, what you say is so interesting, but I cannot bring it up in my faction because I would never get put up for my election district again if I would even mention this. So they may say in private, these are nice ideas, but if it comes to the question of showing up an appearance, many of them don't have the backbone because they say, if I lose my job, I can't do good. But if they have the job, they are prevented from doing good. So what is this arguing worthwhile? And I think, the problem is that you can blame the government and you can blame the Congress. But, my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, always would say, it is the fault of the people, because if you keep electing people who are absolutely unfit for office and who are clearly following different interests than that of the people who are voting for them, then, it is also in large part the fault of the population allowing this to happen. And, it is obvious that the entire game is to keep people from thinking straight, from having the kind of knowledge which they would know to judge these things. There's an enormous apparatus in motion to prevent people from thinking clearly. One of them is naturally the drug plague, the deregulation in terms of dope. In Germany, they have now basically made legal the use of cannabis. And, if people are all the time entertained and their mental faculties are confused by different substances, that makes the ruling much more easy, because I think the only remedy to that is to have state citizens who take the responsibility for their life, for that of their nation, and for humanity as a whole, serious enough that they qualify themselves so that they could be called upon to be president, to be cabinet post, to be, economic minister, health minister, secretary of education. But most people, they rather prefer to take a smaller view and enjoy barbecue and, other kinds of harmless entertainments, admittedly, but not really making sure that the republic is kept. And I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said, I gave you a republic, or was it Washington? I think it was Benjamin Franklin. I gave you a republic, but make sure you can keep it.
I think one of the best critiques of democracy came from William Shakespeare in the play Julius Caesar, that in addition to the influence of Plato, Shakespeare had influence on the founding fathers. The scene after the assassination of Caesar, where first Brutus addresses the crowd and the crowd is cheering for Brutus, and then Mark Antony comes up, mocks the argument of Brutus, and the crowd is now calling for Brutus's head. So I think that it's clear that the idea of democracy, as you hear from Blinken and from the Chatham House and the Atlantic Council, was what Shakespeare was warning about. So Helga, we've come to the end. Do you have any final words for people?
Well, I just would like you to join the Schiller Institute, to join the International Peace Coalition. We are meeting every Friday if you write to us, we will tell you how you can participate. Because I think, we are in a situation where the upheaval by the students, especially in the United States, but it's also happening in several European countries. I think that is a hopeful change, because it's a expression of that there is a significant segment of the population who is standing up for what is right. But obviously the forces who are making a lot of profit from the war don't want to quell these conflicts. They want to keep them going. I think the Pope just made a new statement, Pope Francis, where he's completely condemned making money with the sale of weapons. He said this is the most disgusting and greatest sin of all. And I think people should listen to that. And, we have to get the war machine retooled. We have to find a way how to stop this idea that, more and more of the real economy is the military part. And in order for that to sustain the debt bubble, the interest rates, and all of this, that you need to have this permanent war, one war coming after the other. That cycle is going to lead to the destruction of humanity in the short term if we don't change it. So join our efforts, and that's the best I can tell you.
Okay, well, we'll see you again next week, Helga.